This is Lorena, and I wanted to do a video on how I added the borders to this beautiful quilt top. I already have a tutorial on how I made the quilt blocks and also to how I put the quilt block together. So I will post them up here somewhere, but this video is on how I made the scrappy quilt top or quilt blocks and also to how I put the borders together. All right, so let's get started. Alright, so what I ended up doing is I had this leftover material, and with that leftover material I started cutting that material into 2.5 inch strips. They were still stacked on top of each other, so I just kind of left them just the way they were, and then I cut those 2.5 inch strips into a 2.5 by 8.5 inch strip. Now after I did that, I kind of separated the colors and I picked randomly one of the 4 colors and made some strip blocks. These strip blocks ended up being 8.5 by 8.5, okay? Now I ended up having about 18 blocks when I did this. I pretty much used almost all the fabric. I think I had a couple squares and that's it, but I used everything pretty much. I wanted to use as much of the fabric as I possibly could, and I only added about maybe 2 yards of material to do the rest of the border. But I wanted to kind of have that scrappiness on the corners, and so I used that extra material to do that. Now with those 18 blocks, you don't have to add them on the border. You can make yourself your own quilt top with those scrappy blocks, but I chose to do it this way, okay? Now after I did that, I measured the quilt top that I had finished. My measurements were 48.5 by 36.5, and I started cutting my, border material, the dark blue. Cut myself several strips, and my strips were 4.5 inch wide. So I wanted a little bit of a thicker, chunkier border to be the first border that I placed. Now I'm very big about measuring your quilt top because sometimes it stretches and it bows on you. So usually I measure the top, bottom, and center, and I get that measurement divided by 3, and then I know how wide or how long my borders need to be. But let me tell you the measurements that I got. My measurements were 4.5 by 36, and I added that to the very top of the border. I went ahead, pin centered, pinned out, pinned, made sure I had no waviness. Also did that to the bottom, and I sewed those 2 pieces together. After that, I measured again the right side, center, and the left side, got my average, and with that, I ended up getting my left and right border were 4.5 by 57. I cut myself 2 pieces, and then I went ahead and I pinned and I sewed it to the right side and the left side. So that's the first border I placed, and I'll place a picture up here somewhere of what it looked like just with one border. Those 8.5 by 8.5 inch strip blocks, I went ahead and I got 5 of them, and I did one vertical and one horizontal, and I alternated up to 5 blocks. Now when you sew these 5 blocks together, the measurement is 41.5 by 8.5, okay? And then with that measurement, I went ahead and added 16 by 8.5 rectangle. And then I added that 16 inch rectangle that's dark blue with my 8.5 blocks that I put together. And I ended up having a very long strip, which was 57 inches long. Now, when I added these 2 strips, this second border, I flipped them on each side. So on one side, I had the scrappy blocks on the top, and the opposite side I flipped it, having the scrappy blocks to the bottom. So now we're gonna add the border to the top and bottom. So on this section, on the top and bottom, I connected 4 of the 8.5 by 8.5 strip block, which my measurement ended up being 33 by 8.5. Then I cut myself another rectangle, and with that rectangle I added 8.5 by 28. Connected those 2 pieces, that long rectangle and my 4 pieces became 61 inches long. I did 2 of those. Now let me just say this, when you're putting the second border, where you have those scrappy 8.5 blocks, start the other section having the scrappy 8.5 blocks in the same corner. So I have the scrappiness just in one corner and scrappiness on the other corner. And this is what the beautiful quilt top looks like. If you're interested in this pattern, I'm still making it. I'm getting all my measurements together. I will post it on Lorena's Quilting Facebook group for you. And you can also just watch the videos. It's not that hard to make. And it came out really, really pretty, I think.